And welcome to this edition of our program, The Platform. And we have interesting guests on our program. And today we are going to be talking about yoga. Our guest on the program is Alexis Bethel, and she is the owner and instructor at Studio Ohana, and that is Cable Beach. And Bianca Nygard is here, and she has again brought us a wonderful guest. How are you doing, Bianca?
Yes, I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good to see you.
Yes, great to be here.
And welcome again
Thank you.
To our program. You said that we spoke some years ago.
We did. Yeah, I think I was sitting right around here 2 or 3 years ago.
2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we had a good show, didn't we?
We did, yeah. I think it was a number of guests, and we talked about kind of inner beauty and things around that. So yeah.
Okay, very good. So Ohana, where the name came from?
So actually, when I opened it with another woman, Colleen, who has since moved to the States. And when we were sitting there and brainstorming names, which was over 4 years ago now, we kind of thought about what we wanted the feeling to be. And the word Ohana actually means family, but it means family as in extended, as in the family that is your community, you know, the place that you live. And it was really important to us. That's what it's still based on, is a feeling of community and healing. So
yes.
Yeah.
And how long have you been a yoga instructor?
Well, I've been teaching full-time now for, you know, I should know this off the top of my head, but I always have to count, I think 5.5 years.
5.5 years?
5.5 years full-time.
And where you learned it?
I learned it, well, you know, I had been practicing for a long time before I became an instructor. So on and off, I've been practicing about 14 years. 14 years? Yeah, seriously for 7. And my first training I did in Washington, D.C., which is where I'm from, and then I've since gone on to do trainings, most of which have been in New York with my teacher. And yeah, so I just keep studying. Yeah,
now, why people get into yoga? Why did you get involved in yoga?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people get into it for a lot of different reasons. I think that when we think about yoga, especially in the West, because obviously it's from India, right? It's from the East. It's entered in through the physical practice. That's the way that most of us have been able to, when it came along and was really popularized in the second half of the 20th century, most of us at that time, we couldn't, you know, Westerners, Americans, we couldn't really understand the value of stilling our minds so much at that point. We didn't have the, you know, incredible amounts of stress that we have. We weren't as global, so now we're not only feeling our own stress, but the stress of the whole world. And so yoga had to be introduced in a way that we could understand it. And we could understand it through, well, we had, what was it called, like jazzercise and aerobics, and we were getting into fitness. So what ended up coming here was the physical practice of yoga, which is still very much alive. It's a lot of what we do at the studio, but also now we're seeing all the necessities in a lot of ways of practices like mindfulness, meditation, breath work, which is also yoga. So for me personally, before I started and before I moved here, I was working in a completely different career. I was in consulting and in international development consulting. So I was traveling all over the world, working with different banks, microfinance institutions, mobile networks, things like that. And I had created this life that was my dream, that I loved, that was everything that I wanted. And I found that I was incredibly stressed. I had fallen back into a depression. I had severe anxiety, and at that point I had developed an eating disorder because my whole life was everything I thought it should be, and it wasn't working. It just wasn't working. And so I really at that point started getting very serious about yoga, because at least I could leave work and go for 75 minutes into a room and do some physical postures and a little bit of breathing and a little bit of meditation. And for 75 minutes, I could forget about what didn't feel so good in my life. Mm-hmm. So it went on that way for a while. And then I realized, I was like, wow, everything that I wanted to do and that I thought was going to make me happy, it's not making me happy. And I've finally found something that has begun to create the peace that I'm craving in myself. And at that point, I decided that I was going to take a leap of faith. I was going to chuck my career. You never chuck it, right? I still use it in ways. I still use what I learned. But and I was going to dedicate my life to trying to bring this to anybody who could hopefully access some level of peace in themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But doing yoga is a spiritual thing, isn't it?
It can be, and it doesn't have to be. It's a lot of things. So I think that, you know, for some people, you're going to get as many answers as people that you ask, right? Mm-hmm. There's everything from Bikram yoga, which is a set of 26 postures in 105-degree temperature, where there's no real conversation or anything about anything spiritual, versus you could go to something like, Kundalini yoga, which is a very spiritually oriented. So it can be, and I think that sometimes what happens is when people hear that word, especially if they are religious, they have a connotation that then that's not for me, right? Because that, you know, that might challenge or be against what I believe in. And my feeling with yoga is that if you want to, which for me it is spiritual, for me personally, that anybody who wants to do it, if you really take, it's really a set of practices and a set of techniques that helps you go inward. And so if you take it as a spiritual practice, then my feeling is that it gets you closer to the God of your understanding. Yeah.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Bianca, you are getting involved in yoga?
Well, I've tried yoga before. I keep on trying yoga in my life, and I'm not consistent with it. I know that when I do it, I feel better. I feel like I actually need to stretch out and learn how to stretch out my body now, and especially at my age and stuff, I feel better about being able to stretch and being able to learn how to breathe, some breathing techniques. And I find that I'm going back to some of these things that were taught to me are coming into my mind when I'm feeling anxiety and stress. And that's really why I invited Alexis here right now. I personally have had a very tough new year. I spoke about it the last show. Mm-hmm. With the robbery of my car, but it set off a next set of events that were very challenging to me. And I was feeling guilty for even feeling bad about the sequence of events that was happening. And you know, I was feeling so much anxiety and feeling like I couldn't push through. I was trying to push through each day and just do the next right thing, and I was just feeling stressed, almost hyperventilating, breathing. And I read something that Alexis had written, and normally I think that people don't post these things on social media. They post only positive. You only show a happy picture of yourself when really you don't know what other sets of events are going on in your mind behind the scenes. And it was refreshing for me to actually be going through all this in my own head and then see Alexis. She has a beautiful display of pictures and, you know, sunset yoga pictures on her wall and everything. And then she made this testimony saying like she's actually been going through a rough time too, and the process of what she's doing in order to help herself. And it just was like, oh, I could breathe and I could know, you know that you're not alone, but you know, it's nice to read somebody's testimony, especially when you think that they have it all together, you know. So I really wanted to welcome her onto the show, and I have worked with her before, and it was refreshing and healing to me. And I've also seen that a lot of people are going through things, so I thought that it could help people to listen to this on the show today.
I see. Alexis, you talk about getting involved with the God of your own understanding. Mm-hmm. Explain that. What do you mean by getting involved with the God of your own understanding?
So, I always want to be sensitive to everybody's beliefs, because I believe how beautiful is it that we live in even a part of the world where we get to choose what we believe, right? That's a lot of people don't have that, And so my feeling is that if, for instance, somebody is Christian and they believe in God or in Jesus Christ, and then in another religion, somebody might believe in something else, and then someone else might consider themselves not religious, but spiritual, and so they might call it God, they might call it the universe, they might call it nature. Some people, that's what they believe in, is nature, is Mother Earth. And so for me personally, it matters less what any one person calls it for me. To me, is there a connection to something bigger than our own self that we're so involved with every day, right? Most of us all day, and I don't say this in any way to belittle what people are going through, but we're so self-involved as human beings, right? It's like, oh, what did that person do that hurt my feelings today? And the bank line was too long and it took my time, and I can't deal with this. I have so much to do, right? It's always about what's going on with us, right? And so do we have a connection to something that's bigger than that, whatever that is, whatever anybody wants to call it?
Whatever you want to call it. And you're not necessarily talking about the connection with the divine.
Sure, why not? Some people would call it that. Some people would call it something else. Yeah.
And so people get involved with yoga no matter what their religion is, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes.
And you can be Hindu, you can still be involved in yoga.
Yeah. So yoga is it is more of a philosophy and a set of techniques and practices.
A philosophy. But there are many philosophies.
Sure.
So what is the specific philosophy that is yoga?
Yeah, so yoga tells us that, and I'll also say that yoga, there's a classical system of yoga, and there are other systems and types of, not types, let's go with the classical system of yoga, which is what most of us that practice nowadays, most of us follow, which is 8 different limbs. So it starts with what are called the yamas, which are a set of rules for how we interact with each other, right? Be kind, be compassionate, things like this. Then some personal observances. So can we keep our body as pure as we can by putting certain foods in it or things like that, right? Self-study is one of them. Are we observing ourselves? Are we studying? Are we trying to understand ourselves better, right? Then the physical practice of yoga is actually only one limb of yoga. It's the 3rd limb, but most of us think yoga and we're like, that's the whole thing. It's the 3rd limb. The 4th one is breathing, right? The 5th one is a little bit more challenging to describe, but it's more a byproduct. It's something that happens. It's when we withdraw from the physical senses, right? And we go inside. Then comes concentration, which leads to meditation, which leads to an understanding of who we are, right? And so when I say a set of techniques and practices, some people might just use a set of techniques that's the physical practice and the breathing. The more of them that you use in connection with each other, the more quickly you're going to feel a sense of inner peace. So that's what I mean by it.
And it is you practice your yoga in silence most of the time, or do you do it with music? Do you do? And I've seen chanting that goes on. So tell us about the various ways to enjoy or to practice yoga.
Yeah, so I love that you asked that, because it's like somebody saying, like, what's exercise? Or like, what is a diet? Or what should people be eating? It's so vast, right? It's
yes.
so vast that it's like,
Yeah.
that's why when it's, I shouldn't say challenging for me, but that's why it's so important to me to educate people that yoga is not just the physical set of postures that we do. People all the time like, well, I can't touch my toes, so I shouldn't come to yoga. And I'm like, oh, it's so much more than that.
It's breathing as well, you say.
Yeah, breathing is a limb in itself.
Yeah, yes.
It's one of the limbs in itself.
And teaching people how to concentrate.
Yeah, which leads to meditation. Yeah, absolutely. Like these are, so we go through techniques to concentrate on things so that we can slow our mind down, right? To reduce stress, to do all of these things. So it can all be part of it. The chanting can be part of it. It is part of a type of yoga called bhakti yoga, or it can be done just for concentration. Sometimes in a yoga class, if you go to a vinyasa class, which is a lot of what we teach, there might be music playing in the background. If you go to a place like Shivananda, which is the ashram out on Paradise Island, there's no music. So it can be almost anything and everything. It's a huge, vast system. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's take a break here. We're on the platform and we are talking yoga today. And Bianca, this is very interesting. We take a break and we'll come right back.